Richard from CJOB, and Shahina is here representing the Muslim worldview, Diana representing the humanist worldview, and Andy representing Bannister, the Christian worldview. Many of you have been texting. We have our open mics here as well, so we'll travel as well. I've got some personal observations at some point that I'd like to get involved here, but let's start with a text question early on, and it's to all three of you. We can begin with you, Andy, on this. How would each of you, as individuals, and how would your community respond if your child converted to the worldview of the other two members of this panel?
Wow, that's a really kind of interesting question, and obviously I don't know sort of Shahina's story so well, but I'll be interested to hear Diana's answer on this, because of course your family have experienced that in yourself, and my family, my mother and father are Christians, but they had 3 children, and they've produced a Christian, an agnostic, and an atheist, so there's a whole variety there. My wife and I became parents about 15 months ago. We have a 15-month-old, so if I look slightly sleepy, it's not the fact that I'm working too hard here in Winnipeg, it's that we're still on sleepless nights mode. And I think the thing about my daughter, and my wife and I have thought about this a lot, particularly because we are going into parenting a little bit older in life, is that really what I want to encourage my daughter to do is follow the evidence where it leads. And so I think one of the things with her is, as we raise her, we will ensure that we sort of teach her the idea that any view is welcome at the supper table, provided you can give reasons for it. I would not actually want her to become a Christian purely because I am. That's not a good reason. I don't believe in Christianity because my parents believed it. I believe in it because it's true. So if she is to come to me later in life and say, I have decided that something else is true, be it Islam or be it atheism, then provided that she's analysed and looked into it fairly, and that's perhaps something else we can discuss and answer to other questions, then, so be it.
So there'd be a test. If she came up to you at 12 years old,
yeah.
Dad, engage in her.
Yeah, I think what I would say to her is say, okay, great, tell me why. Tell me why. And I think one of the most important questions we can ask of others, be they family, be they friends, be they even ourselves, is the why question. But I think with parents, whether we are Christians or Muslims or atheists, whatever we are, there's a risk in parenting, isn't there? That you do your best to instill your beliefs, your hopes, your dreams into your children, but the moment you create that other life, there's that sense that you can't control them. That's what it means to be human. And so, yeah, she might want to choose something that I don't agree with, but I'm going to love her anyway. That's what parenting means.
Well, I have a 12-year-old. She's in the audience right now. So, Katie, this one's for you. My daughter was...
Don't embarrass me, Mom.
My daughter was 3, and she realized she was going to die. She asked me what happened after you die. And so I told her what I thought happens. I said, I think we just die, and it's maybe similar to going to sleep, and you don't feel anything. And I said, but other people believe different things. I said, Grandma believes in Christianity, so she thinks she's going to heaven. I said, some people believe that they get reborn again as something else, maybe an animal. And she immediately started crying, I want to go to heaven. I don't want to be an animal. So, I tried to, of course, our house is filled with literature on atheism. My books are scattered everywhere. She's inundated with my worldview. My husband is also an atheist, but he doesn't yak about it all the time like I do. It'll be interesting. I hope that she'll go where the evidence leads her. Right now, she probably identifies as an atheist, but I don't know that she truly has a thorough understanding of the issues at her age. But whatever she does choose, I will support her, and she can expect, though, to have some really challenging dinner conversations when she comes home from university.
Well, when I was 6 years old, my mother took us to the Roman Catholic convent school and enrolled us. She didn't tell my dad, and she didn't tell my grandmother. When she came back, there was, oh my God, they're going to become Christians. My mother stood her ground, and she said, that's the best school I can find in the city, and that's where my daughters are going. And they relented. when I was 14, I went to my dad and I said, "Where is God? You talk about God, where is God? Show me." He looked at me, smiled, and he pointed to his library, which was extensive, and he said, "I have to prove nothing to you. Go find yourself." And that is the environment that I grew up in. Coming to Canada and having a son here, growing up here, all I could do is show him by example what a Muslim is and how a Muslim should be. After that, it's his choice. It's God's will. We can't control our children. They are given to us in trust. We do the best. As parents, we do the best as friends, and rest we leave in the hands of God.
Questions from the audience in just a moment here. Personal story. More texts coming up.
Your mic's not on.
I need my mic on. Is my mic on now? Yes. Plan B. There's always a plan C. There's no plan D. Personal story. When I was 4.5 years old, and I grew up in a Roman Catholic family, French-Canadian family in St. Norbert. And my life changed as a 4.5-year-old with the death of my 16-year-old brother in a car accident. And we were a typical French-Canadian Roman Catholic family. I look back now and think of, like many other French-Canadian families, we were hypocrites in many ways. Church on Sunday, but we didn't always practice what we preached. The long and the short of the story was, my parents, especially my mother, lost her faith. Because how could God be so cruel in taking away her first son? And we've had this conversation over the years. And my question to the panel, and to begin with you, Andy, many people believe, and I grew up in a household of a lot of mixed feelings, but there was that pronouncement that God is cruel, and how could he do this? And throughout this, sometimes there isn't hope. How do you address that?
Yeah, that's a powerful question. And as I shared in my talk, I mean, obviously, a couple of years ago we went through, a loss experience of our own. I think one of the first things I would say is that when it comes to the question of evil, I mean, one of the interesting things, I think one of the reasons why evil and suffering is such a profound question, whatever your worldview, and there are three worldviews here. Atheism is a worldview as much as humanism. We can discuss that later. Is to go that evil hits us both intellectually and emotionally. It hits us on the question of why. Everybody asks the question why, but it then also hits us the level of the heart. And of course, one of the interesting things is that by leaping out of theism, leaping out of Christianity, and one can fully understand why someone might react as your mother does. In one sense, it doesn't solve the problem, because all you end up with is you're still left with the pain, you're still left with the suffering, and all you've done is you've removed God, who arguably is one of the main resources we have, I think, for dealing with the problem. And if the atheistic worldview is to be believed as the sum total of a description of reality, then we are where Richard Dawkins says we are in a world in which there is no good, no evil, nature simply is. But inherently we ask why, and inherently we think the world ought to be differently. Inherent in your mother's question is the accusation that the world ought to be different. Interestingly, that's a question that's only valid if there's God, because otherwise there's no one there to listen to that question. One of the things I find most profound about the Bible is questions about suffering and pain can be found within it. I say to people, go and read the Psalms, where the psalmist wrestles through that question. Can I, as a Christian, answer why that your brother died? No, I can't. I can't answer a specific question as to why. I think I can begin to give an answer. Maybe we can unpack this in more detail as we go on, because the question may come up from others as to why we live in a world in which there is evil. That I think, and suffering, that I think we can address as Christians. We can address the generalities, not the specifics. But I think what's interesting is the way that everyone asks why. And that why question only works if there is more than just the material.
This is a very personal question for me because I did lose my firstborn. When he was first diagnosed with a very rare condition, it was very painful for us. We were a young couple. Later on, when he passed, slowly progressed to a stage where he couldn't talk and was in a wheelchair. I was, of course, as a mother, devastated. We did our best. We took care of him. We were blessed to have him because he always smiled. When he passed away, someone called me and asked, "How are you doing?" This was another Muslim. "How are you doing?" And I said an Arabic phrase, Alhamdulillah, which means praise be to Allah. There was total silence at the other end, and then the response was, "What? You just lost a child, and you're praising the Creator?" And my answer was, yes, because he had the best care that we could give him, the best place that we could be for him to receive that care. And death is inevitable. We all have to die. His time had come. He's gone before. We will see him again in the life after. The question of why came when he was first diagnosed, and the faith came to my rescue and said, "Why not? What's so special about you?" Even the prophets were tried through their children, through suffering and through. So it is how you react to it. Because Allah says in the Quran, surely you will be tested with loss of life and fruit of your labor. It is those who put their trust in God are the ones who will be successful, who say from Allah we come and to Allah is our return. So for me, my faith was what kept me going and gives me the strength.
Well, I mean, there's no question that it's a bitter pill to swallow, that we have to accept that there's no evidence that there's anything after this life. I don't like it. I'd like at least one extra life, but that's the reality. And to me, it means that this world, this life, is more meaningful because I know it's going to end. What I would say to a grieving mother, I don't know, other than to offer her my human companionship, my comfort, and to share in her with her grief and sorrow. I was in an internet discussion once with a Christian. Now, this isn't specifically talking about someone who has lost a child. It was what I would say as a non-believer to some child who was dying of leukemia. What could I offer them with my humanist worldview? And I said I would do exactly the same thing that anybody would do. I would try to relieve their suffering. I would be with them. I would listen to their fears. I would talk with them. And I said, the one thing that I couldn't tell them, though, is that I had a cure for their disease. And I said, part of that, what bothers me so much about this issue is that we have had so much wasted human potential with people as intelligent as Andy here, spending their lives trying to find out how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, rather than spending that amazing intellect looking for a cure for cancer. I think we could do a lot better if we actually started working on things that we can really find solutions for.
Oh, we have a debate going. This is good fun. One of the interesting things, and it came out in Diana's talk, and this will be a fascinating area to explore, particularly if there are questions on this, of course, is the moment that you talk about making the world a better place and progress and those kind of words. Of course, it raises the interesting question of progress towards what. You see, one of the most important things we need to understand about science is value neutral. One of those very, very interesting observations when you look back at the history of science, you see this. For example, if I can remember the gentleman's name, this example will be all better. But there was a medic who in about the 1930s, 1940s invented the first artificial synthesis of vitamin K. He invented the first artificial substitute for vitamin K, and that's been used in treating hundreds, thousands, if not millions of patients with vitamin K deficiency over the years. Interesting thing, the same scientist, the same medic also invented something else. He invented napalm, which during the Vietnam War and during other theatres of conflict has resulted in the death, scarring and injuring of hundreds of thousands of people. Same scientist. Science is value neutral. What makes the difference between how you use it is a question that science itself kind of answer. It lands us fully into some profound questions of truth and goodness. What counts as progress, for example? And it was interesting, Diana's comment there about about wasted intellect and angels on the head of a pin. Of course, it's very sobering. No problem, you're very welcome. I'm British. We feel inferior all the time, so no problem. Is, of course, if you look at the history of science and medicine particularly, how much medicine and how many hospitals were founded by Christians. I taught and worked for 6 years at St George's Hospital Medical School in London. We had a wing of that hospital called the Jenner Wing. It was named after Edward Jenner, the founder of modern immunology, vaccinology, a very committed Christian. And his discoveries, driven by his faith, not antithetical to his faith, he was both religious, he was a theologian and a medic, led to huge discoveries. So the two are not antithetical, and any attempt to play them off, either by those on the religious side or the irreligious side, I think is dangerous. Science and faith actually belong together. The history of science shows us that.
Yeah, I would just remind my colleagues also that the modern medicine is based on the discovery of Muslim scientists and doctors. The first medical encyclopedia was written by a Muslim. The map of the world was charted by Muslims. So the scientists, the Dark Ages, while Europe was in Dark Ages, it was the Muslim scientists and intellectuals who brought the knowledge of Aristotle and Plato and Socrates to Europe. So I don't see that there is a dichotomy between being religious and being an intellectual or being a scientist. One of the things that my metaphysics teachers told us one time, which has stuck in my mind, is that when apple fell on Newton's head, that is not when gravity came into existence. Gravity had already there, it was created. Science discovers what God has created. So when I see the sunset, maybe my agnostic friend would look at it and say, wow. When I look at the sunset, I say, Subhanallah, praise be to the one who created this beauty.
The audience now? Who has a question? You put your hand up and we'll follow you with a microphone. Go ahead, right over here. Just stand up. We've got wandering microphones. Now the risk is, as we hand you the microphone, that you decide not to ask a question, but to make a speech. Go ahead.
I have a question for Diana. Diana, you say you're a humanist. You said that we need to stand up against evil, but you don't believe in angels, you don't believe in a devil, you don't believe in anything. So what is evil, Diana?
It's just a word that we use to describe something that we think is wrong. Giving it a word like evil or calling it sin just, presupposes that it has a religious context. Humans have morality. We have some things about us that are innate to how we're made, however evolution made us. We have compassion, we have empathy. We also have the ability to express anger and aggression, and we give those things labels based on how they affect us. It's not really that complicated. People want to make morality into this great big thing, and we often get into conversations about whether or not there's objective morality, but it's just simply it's a function of how we get along, and it's something that is true about us. As to where we get our values from, they come from us. They come from every single one of us. And we get to decide, we get to think about reasons why things are good and why they're bad, and you have to make a case for it.
Yeah, that's a great question. What is evil? Whatever your worldview, whether your worldview is atheism, humanism, Islam, Christianity. And I think my answer as a Christian to the question, what is evil, would be that evil is the thwarting of purpose. So evil and morality tie into, it's not so much the question of objectivity and some of these other kind of words that are sometimes thrown around. Really the question of good and evil comes down to this. Is there a purpose to human life? The Greek philosophers, people like Plato and Aristotle, like to talk about telos, from which we get the word teleology, that means purpose. That sounds a big complicated word, but it's actually pretty simple. If you have a boat, you don't try and drive that boat on the road. The purpose of that boat is to go on the lake. And if you put it in the lake, it works beautifully. Try and drive it on the road, you will break it. Likewise, if you try and use your lawnmower on the ocean rather than the lawn, you will break it because there is a purpose. Does human life have a purpose? If it doesn't, you rather end up with a position of saying, well, actually, as Diana hinted there, that morality and the things we choose to be good and evil are merely labels. In fact, Richard Dawkins, one of the world's leading atheists, is on record as saying, if we reroute the script of evolution, it could perfectly be the case that rape would be okay, because nothing is fixed. There is no up, no down, no left, no right. Everything is purely arbitrary. Now, the question is this. Does that describe the human experience? Does that describe the way that we operate as individuals and societies? Does it describe our human experience of morality? And does it actually work? One of the things I'm very fond of talking to, just telling to my students when I teach on this subject, is I say, always look for the smuggled value judgment. What do I mean by that? If you're talking to someone who says they don't believe in a God or any kind of higher power or any of these things, watch for when value judgments begin being smuggled in. When people begin saying to you, you ought to do this is better than that. So with Diana this evening, to be a little bit cheeky here, I would say to the audience, watch for when Diana says, this is better, this is good, this is not so good, you ought to do this. And ask yourself in your mind, where's that value judgment coming from? Can you sustain that on atheism? Even humanism itself. Why take human as the sum total of as the measuring stick? As one atheist friend said to me, I have to admit, he said, looking at the sum total of planet Earth, it would be better for the planet, quite frankly, if human beings went extinct tomorrow and cockroaches became our overlords, because, quite frankly, human beings have made a mess of it. And Peter Singer, another atheist philosopher, has said that actually to speak of the human rights and these things is speciesist, because actually it privileges the human. Why not actually level everything? I think this kind of conversation is an important one.
I think if we just left it to human beings to decide right and wrong, it would be a free-for-all. We do need some guiding principles, and Ibn Taymiyyah, one of the great sociologists and philosophers, said, if you are in a room which is totally dark, but your vision is 20/20, would you be able to see anything? And of course the student said, of course not, I mean it's dark. He says that is the relationship between revealed knowledge and empirical knowledge that you gain from your senses, is that if you do not have revealed knowledge to guide you, you may have all your intellect and all your senses, but you will be like you are in a dark room. So to me, that is the relationship that I bring to why my worldview is informed from my belief system. Because it, as you said, as I said in my opening, the purpose is defined for me, and I'm not left on situational ethics and morality, but on absolutes of right and wrong, and the various shades in between, and that can be adapted, and that can be, and that evolves. So that's my take.
Well, I mean, Andy and Shahina, they're both talking about, first of all, Andy, you're talking about the is-ought difficulty. You can get an ought from an is, as long as you have a goal. And human beings are biological creatures that reproduce. So at a very basic level, what we ought to do is that what perpetuates our species, because that's what we are. We add values to that based on what type of creatures we are. We live socially. We have to have ways that competing individuals in a group can get along. That's all you need to get morality. And whatever meaning, and you talk about if we were different, if the clock was turned back and we evolved differently, rape could be something that was right. Yes, with different creatures. We are what we are, and we value things. We don't want to be hurt. I don't particularly like when somebody punches me in the face. I have empathy. I know that if I punch them in the face, it's probably going to feel the same way that I feel. Therefore, I'm not going to punch people in the face. It's not really complicated. And an objective morality that's a revealed morality is not objective in any way. It originates in the mind of a God who can't be affected or harmed in any way. As far as I'm concerned, if there is such a God, they're not playing in this game because the rules don't even affect them.
Hey, this is great. We're getting a debate going. I can see Richard's juices flowing over there. I'm very intrigued, Diana, that you kind of said there that the purpose of human life, as you see it, is to reproduce, and that's I think probably on atheism that's the best you can do. Presumably, that would mean if you encounter a couple who have chosen not to have children, you would have to consistently look at them and go, you ought to have kids. Get off your backside, stop wasting your life, and reproduce, because that's the ought. And the whole point of an ought is an ought is an ought. An ought is not subjective. And so I'm assuming, that's an interesting one as a nurse, I'm wondering how that plays out, but we can come to that in a moment. The other issue is... yeah, you're having fun there. The other issue as well, I think it's very interesting that you throw the is-ought dilemma out so casually. The is-ought dilemma, as Diana alluded to, goes back to a famous atheist philosopher, goes back to David Hume, who said that, of course, science is very good at telling us is. We can experiment and see what would happen if I gave arsenic to everyone in the front row. We could do that experiment. Ought I to do it? Well, we can't really answer that using science. It simply can't be done. And I can quote you numerous atheists who will tell you that quite happily. But the interesting thing I want to pick you up on as well is that comment about God is an interesting one. Because you're absolutely right. If God simply sits up there in the heavens, doing nothing, not getting involved, distant, removed, transcendent, aloof, never getting his feet dirty with the dust of the world, then I think that accusation stands. But of course, that's not the claim at the heart of Christianity, is it now? The claim at the heart of Christianity is that God has stepped into this world of tears, that God has walked the earth, has got his feet dirty with the mess of the world, with the dust of the world, and his hands bloody with the nails of the world. And that at the heart of the Christian claim stands Jesus Christ, who, if he is who he claimed to be, then God does know something about suffering, pain, and evil, and God has played by the rules. So that brings it very nicely for me to where the question should revolve as a Christian. Who is Jesus, and is he who he claimed to be? And if so, that's a bit of a game changer around concepts of God. But I know Shahina is about to.
Okay, I don't know what I was getting into when I accepted the invitation. I can just say that I have great hope for you, Dan. Great hope for you. Because the declaration of faith of Muslims is La ilaha illallah, right? So you're halfway there. La ilaha, there is no God. But illallah, except one God. So you're halfway there. I just need to bring you a little bit over. But really, to me, the Quran tells me, Lakum dinakum waliya din. To you, your belief, to me, mine. We can debate till we go blue in the face, but I respect you for what you believe. I believe you have values that come from a core in your being. And so I would leave it at that. I would say you have a right to your belief. I may not agree with it, but that's fine. As long as you are not hurting anyone, you're not imposing it on me, you're not ridiculing what I believe, I would respect you, and I will stand up for your right to believe that. Because that's what the Quran tells me.
Very good.
Let's move on to a new question, because I don't want to get into a debate about how much Jesus suffered. That's maybe better for another day.
We'll go back to the audience in a moment. Shahina, from text. Where is the Islamic justice for women?
Allah says in the Quran, both men and women are created from a single soul. The soul has no gender. Not a single scholar in the 1400 years of scholarship in Islam ever raised the question, is woman a person, a woman a human? A woman has a soul. So for me, that is the basic. From that comes the rest. So I know that there is a lot of misinformation. There are a lot of jerks among Muslims who don't treat women right, as there are in every other community. But if you're talking about the faith itself, and the prophet of that faith on how he treated the women, what are my protections in my faith, my rights and my responsibilities. I am blessed as a Muslim woman.
And the follow-up to that, and then we can open it up to all three speakers, again from text. If Islam is all about peace and justice, why is there less personal freedom and religious tolerance in predominantly Muslim countries than here in Canada?
Okay, first of all, Muslim countries, we have 1.6 billion Muslims in the world. If you look at the contemporary times, many of those countries are either under occupation, or in conflict, or in war. So the geopolitical conditions right now are not very pristine, not very good, and there are many variables that are leading to the conflict that we see today. As I told all of you, I went to a convent school. 99% of my teachers were Christians. We celebrated Christmas in our school. We were not allowed to say our 5 daily prayers. I've said my share of Hail Marys. But I could never come home and tell my mother that I was not allowed to pray in the school because I was considered an infidel. So I have seen both sides of the coin, but at the same time I have seen millions and millions and millions of Christians and Jews and Muslims who through history have lived together as friends, as neighbors, and I choose to look at the positive and the strengths in each and every one of us, rather than look at the extremists, the terrorists, the hate mongers, and take them as an example of either of our faiths, because they are not. Right now the trouble is the extremist of this camp are talking to the extremist of that camp. It's not the people who are truly living their lives according to the teachings of our prophets that are being heard. And so we see this in a very jaded way. Our lens is not clear, and we don't have enough information or knowledge, but we are all passing judgments on each other.
This actually question, if you could both answer this for me. I hear this a lot from people of different religious traditions, that people that are doing something bad are not living the true values of that faith. It's the no true Scotsman fallacy, no true Christian, no true Muslim. What mechanism do you use for deciding who is the true Christian?
That's a great question. If I may, can I just weave it into the question from the audience as well, because the two things connect. It's interesting that every year the Pew Forum, which is a think tank based in the States, produces a global study on religious freedom and persecution. It's called the Religious Persecution Index, and you can look it up online. It's quite interesting. Every year. The top 2 or 3 countries that are worst for religious persecution sort of shuffle around. This last year it's been North Korea. And what goes without saying is that the majority of the countries where religious persecution is at the strongest tend to be either, sadly, as Shahina sort of picked up, they're Muslim countries, and that's often Muslims, atheists and Christians who are on the receiving end, and then secondly, atheistic countries such as North Korea and others. There's a huge issue and lots of work needs to be done. And I just say this because I think it's important for all of us to take religious freedom seriously. And what excites me is that Canada is opening up a Department of Religious Freedom to work on this issue. It's something we should all take a stand on. But Diana's question is a brilliant one. How do we tell who a true Christian is? Of course, I can turn it around and ask, how do we tell who a true humanist is? But let's talk about the Christian one for a moment. What you can do in terms of Christianity and Islam is fairly straightforward, actually. It's a similar answer, I think, for both of our faiths over here. You look at the founder. So if somebody says they're following Jesus Christ, if somebody says that he is their Lord, that they are his disciple, they are doing their very best to ensure that he is the Lord of their life and not their own ambitions, their own desires, and that's what it means to be a Christian. It doesn't mean following a system of morality or beliefs or philosophy. It means simply to bow the knee and say, Jesus is Lord, he sits in charge of my life, and I no longer. You can compare them to the founder. So you can measure someone up to Jesus Christ and see how they stand. And that means, I think, what every Christian should do is they can turn to their friends who are not Christians and say to them, if you see a disparity I've only just met Diana, but if I knew her better, if she was a work colleague, I would say to you, Diana, if you see a difference, if you see that my life, lived out as a colleague, as a friend, as a neighbour, does not measure up to how Christ was and Christ's example, then you have every right to call me a hypocrite, quite frankly. And that's what it means to be a Christian. In the case of Islam, it's Muhammad. Of course, the flip side of the question for an atheist is, where does the line get drawn? You are by no means going to follow his example, but it does raise an interesting question. Let's take somebody who ran their country along atheistic lines. Let's take Joseph Stalin, who the very last thing he did on his deathbed... No, this is a good question, and those of you who are atheists need to just consider this. The last thing that he did on his deathbed, interestingly enough, was raise his fist to heaven and shake it at God. Because I know somebody who is friends with one of the generals who was there when Stalin actually passed away. Here is the interesting question to reflect on. What would you say to a Stalin at the end of his life to convince him that he should not have made the choices he had? That's not to say you would repeat them, but what would you say to him within a purely atheistic framework to say, Stalin, the way that you have lived your life is not a good one? Because quite frankly, he could turn around to you and go, we are just atoms, we are just physics and chemistry and biology. And I have lived that way, and I've done very nicely, thank you. So you could hold us to a standard, but I think there is equally a question there for those of us who hold to no worldview.
First of all, atheism is not humanism. As I spoke
Well,
on
it's
in
not.
my... No, it's not. It's a lack of a belief
Oh, it is.
in God. Stalin was not a humanist, and if you could find one example in history of someone who professed humanist values that behaved like a crazy dictator like that, then you might have a case. But when it comes to, you would say you could turn the question around on me and say, how do you know who's a true humanist? Well, I mean, that's the thing though. Humanism is just a commitment to use a solid method of inquiry through scientific inquiry into finding things out, and a commitment to using rational thinking, compassion, and empathy to guide our decision making. That's all it is. We don't necessarily have one right answer or one wrong answer. There may be differences and situations that have different answers. I don't see that we suffer from the same difficulty as somebody who is professing to have, the ultimate answer from the creator of the universe.
I think it's a very good question you have asked, because I think all of us struggle with it. Because first thing, Islam tells me you are not a judge on anyone. Okay, so I can't judge anybody's religiosity. Right? But and the other problem that we have for Muslims in the West is that there is so much lack of knowledge of Islam itself. So any Tom, Dick, and Harry or Bin Laden can stand up and say, this is what the Quran says, and then people say, well, here it is. He said it, she said it, and we heard it on Fox TV and CNN, so that must be the truth. And so for me, it becomes very problematic and very contentious to answer that question unless the audience is knowledgeable about my faith, right? Because what I'm going to tell you is how do I see if a Muslim is a true Muslim is through his actions. Not the fact that he proclaims the declaration of faith, not the fact that he has a long beard, not the fact that she wears a hijab, not the fact that she goes to the mosque. It's the action, because the Quran says it is not belief that you turn your face to the east or the west, or you read the Quran, or you give the zakat. The true faith is that you help the needy, you help the widows, you emancipate the slaves, you take care of those who ask for help and those who don't ask for help, right? Those who preserve life, because preserving one life is as if you preserved all of humanity. So when a terrorist comes and takes a life of a civilian and says, Allahu Akbar, it doesn't make it sanctified by Islam. It is just a phrase that he utters. But the knowledge of Islam is so limited and so skewed in the West through so much fear-mongering and so much stereotyping and so much that we cannot have an informed discussion unless you give me 3 hours to first give you the basics of Islam, right? And then move on. So I think I know by the actions of the person, if they're following the precepts of Islam or the example of Prophet Muhammad. And give you one, I'm a counselor, right? So when a man comes to me, a woman comes to me in a domestic violence situation, and this has happened many times, and her husband, and I'm counseling them, and the husband says, I have the right to beat her because it says so in the Quran, and here's the verse, and excuse me, open up that verse and we will talk about it. Because the Prophet was the first exegesis of the Quran. And he said, the best among you, O Muslim men, is one who is best and kindest to his wife. He did not say mother, he did not say father, he did not say children. He said his wife. That is a diagnostic tool, meaning what? That in the privacy of your home, if you are fearful of Allah and you choose and treat your wife well, that means you have faith in your heart. Because in the privacy of home, you have the power to do whatever, right? So those are a lot of diagnostic tools that I have that I can challenge someone who is not following the precepts of Islam but pretending to. So, and that's what I said, it's a huge discussion and a lot of knowledge required to have that.
Let's go to the audience who has their hand up here. Please and thank you. Oh, don't be shy. Right over here. A microphone is coming to you in 5, 4, yeah, you'll be next then too. 3, 2, and in 1.
Okay, a question I guess all of you are going to answer. If there is a God who's all-knowing and all-powerful, and he has a heaven, and he says, why should I let you into my heaven? What would you say?
Could we repeat the question just one more time? A little louder here.
If there is a God who is all-powerful and all-knowing, and he has a heaven, and he says, why should I let you into my heaven? What would you say?
Why should I let you into heaven? What would you say? Andy, you want to
I can
take a stab at that?
I can take a stab at that. Thank you for repeating that question. I think all of us were sitting up here. I think the reason we couldn't hear you is we're all shivering so much that our knees are knocking together, and all we can hear is.
We're thinking of burning the table, actually.
Good question. It's the reason I think it's an interesting question. It's a very, very common question, actually. And one of the things I found interesting is that actually there's a very interesting comment that Diana made earlier on that sort of stuck in my mind, and we didn't have a chance to go back to, about the decline of religion in the West. What's actually interesting is that surveys have picked up a number of things. On the one hand, organised religion is declining, whereas spirituality, in inverted commas, is increasing, which is quite interesting. We picked this up in the UK, first of all, and there's quite fascinating studies to discover that actually, as I say, while attendance at, say, Anglican churches is falling, other stuff is going all over the place, and some of the belief systems you run across now is quite fascinating. But one of the most common beliefs is this. I find that usually when I get talking to people, and I find they believe in some kind of God or some kind of higher power or whatever it is, and if you then discover they believe in heaven, and the last survey that was done showed that 78% of Canadians believe in some kind of afterlife, which is actually slightly less than Brits, and I think 81%, is the general perception is when you then push through to people to say, well, okay, if there is a God, let's imagine there is one, and if there is a heaven, what do you need to do to get there? Most people think this is the answer. Most people think the answer is, well, you want to be good. I guess all good dogs go to heaven. So you try and live a good life, try and live a nice life, be nice to people, help old ladies across the road, stroke kittens, all that kind of stuff. And if there's a God and if there's a heaven, I will kind of earn my way there. There are many religions that operate largely on that basis. And in fact, every religion and belief system in the world, apart from one, says that the way that you achieve heaven, nirvana, a high state of human existence, or whatever, is by either doing the right thing, knowing the right information, or having the right mystical experience. Almost every religion is built on one of those three principles. Islam, for example, is largely built on a combination of doing the right thing and knowing the right thing. Christianity is the one exception. This doesn't necessarily make it true or false, but it does make it stand out in saying that actually it's not about what you know, what you do, or the experience you have, it's about the personal relationship. that you have. It's about whether you know Jesus Christ. And the staggering claim at the heart of the Christian faith is not that God is distant up there keeping a kind of celestial score sheet, but actually that God offers to do something through Christ about the state of the problem. And to go, every other system of thought believes in diagnosing the problem. All of us here in this room probably have an opinion on what is wrong with the world, but that's only the beginning. If you go to your doctor and your doctor says you have cancer, you need to do something. If you walk out of the surgery, well, there's a bit of a problem. But if you say to him, doctor, okay, you've diagnosed me, what do I now do? Well, that's the way the Christian worldview would proceed, to say there is actually something broken at the heart of the human condition, and I think we can see that when we look around the world, but rather than stopping there, it offers the power to change. You see, Jesus Christ did not come to make bad people good. He didn't come bringing moral information. He came claiming to make dead people live, and to actually engage in a project of transformation. And I think that makes Christianity unique. So Christianity says there is no reason that God should let you into his heaven, other than the fact that he offers you forgiveness and reconciliation with him in Christ. And you can take that free offer and accept it, or you can walk away and try and do your own thing. But if that is the case, then come some consequences.
I can tell you as a Muslim, I can't tell you if I'm going to heaven. I'm hoping. I am doing everything I can that I do. Well, if I'm standing at the door of heaven and the Creator asks me why I should let you in, I remember the poem of Rumi. I think many of you are familiar with Rumi. He said, I will not enter paradise because of who I am, O Lord, but I will enter heaven because of who you are. And you are merciful, and you are forgiving. So I'm relying on that mercy to get into heaven. And I'm relying on that mercy when I say a prayer for all of you, that you go to heaven.
Can I just make a point here in Shahina's defense? I often hear apologists like Andy talk about the uniqueness of Christianity in that it doesn't matter what you do. The uniqueness of it is the way that Jesus, puts his hand out to you and accepts you for whatever you are. And yet, as far as I can tell, there really is no difference between the Islamic concept of God being merciful. In effect, it's not really based on your actions, but it's based on God being merciful to you in spite of the fact that you're a sinner and probably didn't do everything perfectly. I don't really see any big difference between that and the Christian concept of God offering forgiveness. Can you explain to me what is so unique about those worldviews?
I think, as Andy was saying, and I've heard it all my life in the school and in the university, that your salvation is through Jesus Christ, through accepting him as Son of God. Muslims believe in Jesus as a prophet, as a human being. And so we love him, we adore him. I named my organization after his name, Isa, because he is a social worker par excellence. And our prophet said that Jesus and he are like this. They're like brothers. So I love and revere and respect Prophet Jesus, but I do not put him as the Son of God. Our salvation is through our deeds, of course, what we will take with us. As I said, I'm hoping and praying and doing everything right, hopefully. But I'm not perfect, I'm not an angel, I have made mistakes. So I am also relying on the forgiveness of the Creator, not only on his mercy, right? And they, of course, go hand in hand. So that would be, I think, the difference, because, as I said, I have no guarantees. Maybe the deeds that I have done, the bad deeds are much more than the good deeds. And then on the day of judgment, God would want to show me mercy. But those who I have inflicted pain on may stand up and ask for justice. And that is why every day of my life I ask for forgiveness from all I know, people we know. I don't try to hurt anyone. I try to sleep at night with grudge-free heart, so that on the day of judgment, people will not stand up against me and ask for justice. Because God would want to do mercy, but he would also have to do justice.
Okay, let me respond to that. Diana, thank you for asking that question. If we had time, I could boil for England on the subject of the differences between Christianity and Islam, because I did my research in that area, because what actually first drew me into these kind of conversations and these kind of debates and these kind of discussions is back in 1997. I made friends with some Muslims in London and then began debating and dialoguing and engaging in discussion, and found it so fascinating that led to a degree and that led to a PhD, so I really want to get out more. And one of the things I find fascinating is that on almost everything that Christianity believes and teaches, Islam and the Quran teach something quite different. And that's not to be disrespectful to Shahina, it's simply to say we recognise difference. And one of the things that I love about this evening is we're not engaging in some kind of very pluralistic morass. There is difference represented here. I think we've seen this already, and that's quite fun. We can actually have those discussions and show those ways of doing that civilly. On this area of forgiveness, it's interesting. I'm glad that Shahina has sort of described the Muslim position there quite well, that she doesn't know whether she's going to heaven. That's very honest. Interesting, Muhammad himself, of course, famously said he did not know either. He made some comments about heaven and hell. One of the most well-known traditions of Muhammad is he said, I looked into heaven and I saw the majority of its inhabitants were men. I looked into hell and the majority of its inhabitants were women. Well, it's actually about 19 different hadith that say that. But here's the interesting thing. Let's talk for a moment about the differences there in terms of forgiveness. One of the challenges, one of the interesting things about what Christianity says about Christ is this, that the God of Christianity, the God who I believe in, is a God who is both a God who is loving. The Bible is very clear that love is not something God does, love is something that God is. And that's a unique claim to Christianity. The Quran uses the word love twice, but not in that way to describe Allah. So the God of the Bible is God who is love. He is also God who is the God of justice. He is the sum total of all goodness. He is the ground of all goodness. So the question is, how do those two things marry together? If God was simply to forgive us and to say, yeah, no problem at all, you can come in despite what you've done, then of course God is being forgiving and loving, but he's not being a God who is just. If a judge in a court case was to look at the convicted murderer in front of him and go, it doesn't matter that you've raped and murdered 17 people, I'm feeling compassionate today, you go scot-free. People would not be saying, wow, what a loving judge. They'd be saying, where is justice? So if God was simply to forgive us, he would not be just. On the other hand, if God was simply to exercise his judgment and say, because of the way that you have behaved, because particularly of the way that you have been self-centered and not responded to me as you should do, therefore I'm going to judge accordingly, and of course there is no love and no forgiveness. And what is interesting about Jesus is it blends those two things together. In the cross, what we see is that love and justice go together. God's love is demonstrated and God's justice is demonstrated. And that is why the cross was necessary, and that's why Christ was necessary. That's the difference between Islam and Christianity.
To the audience in a moment, but to the text message, and I think it follows nicely here. And it's provocative, and it's straight to the point. If there is or was a God, why didn't he or she provide evidence? You've got 1 minute. Go.
Looking at me first.
I absolutely am. Because that's what it gets down to for many, and many of the themes here. You're talking a lot. Where's the evidence?
Fantastic. What was exciting is the last week I've spoken 3 times at the University of Winnipeg and the University of Manitoba, and on is there evidence for God. So we actually, without going into the arguments, because you said 1 minute, we looked. No, well, I will list them. We talked about at the university 7 pieces of evidence. We talked about the fact that science works, in particular the peculiar applicability of mathematics to physics, one of the most oldest puzzles we have in philosophy. Why can we even do science? Diana's talked about science. I love science. Why does science actually work? Why is it that we live in a university that's coherent, a university in which mathematics, which is on many descriptions of reality a human invention, fits so well with physics? That question kept Einstein awake at night. So the peculiar applicability of maths and the fact that science works. The fine-tuning of the universe would be another argument from science. Then we move from the exterior to the interior. We have the fact that our minds work. On atheism, if the atheistic, and I'm being careful not to say humanistic, if the atheistic description of reality is correct, what is going on between Diana's ears, my ears, Shahina's ears, and your ears is nothing more than a chemical reaction fizzing away. Yet we use words like raisin and thinking to describe what goes on up here. But it's just a chemical reaction fizzing in the same way as a can of Dr. Pepper fizzes when I shake it. Why do we find ourselves able to think? Why is it that we are concerned with things like morality and justice? We've touched on that argument, but we can go further into it. Things like beauty would be another one. The argument from desire would be another one that C.S. Lewis popularised. We can unpack if we have time. But the best argument of all, Richard, I would say, is life and death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Christianity is a historically grounded faith. In fact, in 1 Corinthians 15 in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul says, if Jesus has not risen from the dead, then our faith is useless. And there is very good historical evidence that I have about 15 seconds left and can't go through for the resurrection. But I think as a historian, I'm on very good grounds for believing that Jesus was who he claimed to be. Well, I'm afraid there is, but there we are.
What evidence is there that there is a God? The Quran answers it and says, look at the skies, the mountain, look at your fingertip. There is a creator. This did not happen with a big bang. Someone designed it, someone created it. And again, it is a very private journey. My answer may not satisfy you. You have to find for yourself. As my father told me, go find God yourself. And I did, because it says, which of the favors of your Lord shall ye deny? Okay? You cannot look at this universe and deny there is a creator. Call him God, call him Allah, call him whatever. And again, Allah has no gender. It's a unique term. So to me, I have found evidence. You have to find your own, or not. It's up to you. But respect the fact that I have, and respect the fact that it is based on knowledge and understanding. One of the issues that I do have with atheists and humanists or whatever is that there is a contempt for people of faith, that somehow we are illogical, irrational, we don't understand, because if we truly did, and to me that is very belittling and very disrespectful, because I don't say to you, if only you knew. I only say to you, I'm praying for you. That's different. And there is another thing, we were talking a lot about the hereafter and all. A man came to the fourth Caliph of Islam, Ali, was also a cousin of the Prophet, and said, I don't believe in the hereafter. And this is 1400 years ago, so they were still having this conversation even then, right? And Ali looked at him and he said, may Allah be pleased with him, said to him, you don't believe in it, that it doesn't exist? Great. But what if it does? Don't you want some insurance? So I'm catching on to that insurance.
You were doing really well there, Shahina, and then you threw Pascal's wager at me.
You feel that you don't have to weigh in because they haven't proven their case?
Well, yeah, I guess I was cut off the hook for that last one, I thought.
Let's go to the audience in the back of the room here. Thank you for your patience.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for your conversations tonight. My question is directed to a reality that is happening right now in the world. And in countries like India and China, there are hundreds of thousands of people who would do anything to get their hands on the Bible, would spend over 12 hours a day studying it, and would risk their life to run a church, an underground church. And in the face of losing their job, going to jail, or even losing their life, why is it that hope flourishes and grows when people put their hope in Jesus as God? And I'd like to hear primarily the human perspective on this, but I'll welcome others too. Thank you.
It's for all three of you.
Did you hear it all? Do you want to paraphrase it?
One more time.
Yeah, it's a bit echoey down here.
It's so echoey, yeah.
Should I move down? Okay, I'll try to say it louder. Yeah, thanks for all your perspectives tonight. And my question was this: in countries where Christianity is so heavily persecuted, why is it that so many people put their faith and hope in Jesus as God when there are so many incentives not to?
Yeah, I have no idea. I mean, obviously they've bought into something that they really believe is true, and they feel that the sacrifice or the risk is worth it. I don't know that that's something that's unique to Christianity or to anything. People throughout history have done things that take great courage, at great personal risk, to help others, to save a life. I'm not sure what is so special or unique about this particular group of people doing something that is, contains personal danger or for something that they believe in.
That's a great question, and one of the privileges I've had in my job is to travel quite widely, so to meet people who have actually been through that kind of stuff. I mean, I think a couple of examples spring to mind. A few months ago, I was being taken from my home in Toronto to the airport by a taxi driver. We got talking, and I said, "So where are you from, sir?" And he said, "I'm from Pakistan. I believe that's your country, Shahina." I said, "Oh, okay. How long have you been here in Toronto?" And he said, "Oh, about 20 years." And we talked about why he came, and he said, "Oh, the reason we had to come here," he said, "my family and I are not good Muslims." And I said, "Well," I said, "would you be Ahmadiyya Muslims?" And he went, "Yes, we are. We are persecuted in Pakistan." So this applies to all religions in one sense, but I think it's particularly Christians where this comes up. I mean, I think there are people in all traditions who have given a lot for their beliefs, but Christians are the ones that intrigue me particularly, because particularly if you were China example, what is interesting is China gave us a little bit of a test case in what happens when you release people's freedom to believe what they like. When the Iron Curtain came down, and when Western missionaries were thrown out of China, there was a lot of hand-wringing in the West. We were like, well, that's the end of the church in China, it will all be over. And there was 40, 50 years of silence before things began to open up slightly. And what happened when the Iron Curtain went up slightly and we got a window into what's going on is we discovered that the underground church in China had exploded. If anything, it was the removal of Western missionaries who had caused that to happen. Maybe we haven't been doing missions as effectively as we might have done. And the Chinese church is now one of the largest in the world and growing tremendously strongly. And I have many, many friends whose families have been through a tremendous amount. The most challenging example I have encountered to me as a Christian is that a friend of mine teaches a lot in Pakistan, again, Shahina's country. He goes there quite regularly. Oh, no, sorry, I didn't mean to infer that at all. In the same way that Britain is where my roots are. Sorry, where your roots are from. See what I mean by Britain, by Brits? We get ourselves in trouble the moment we open our mouths. Oh, my colleague was in Pakistan and he got talking to a Christian convert who was a pastor. And during the conversation, the pastor rolled up his sleeve and revealed the burn marks on his arms. He'd been tortured by the police for his faith because he'd converted. And through the translator, he said to my colleague, he said, "It must be wonderful to be a Western Christian where you can talk really freely about your faith. I envy the Western Christians." My colleague back through the translator said, "Well, many Christians in the West are, I'm afraid, not very bold in sharing their faith. They're a little bit reticent." The pastor back through the translator said, "Well, why is that?" My colleague said, "Well, it's because they're afraid of people laughing at them and saying nasty things and this kind of stuff." Back through the translator, the Pakistani pastor said, "Such a church is dying." And then the translator stopped and said, I'm terribly sorry, I've translated him wrongly. What he has actually said is such a church is already dead. It's very challenging for those of us who do claim to be Christians here in this room tonight, because we do have freedoms here in the West to talk about what we believe, but often we do shut up and say nothing. And I think for me, the encouragement, the excitement, the challenge of those from the countries that you describe is not merely the hope they have found in Christ, but the example it is to folks like myself. The challenge facing the church in the East is persecution. The challenge facing the church in the West is seduction. And I think there's a lot we can learn from our friends, our brothers and sisters.
I think there is a lot of conversation around the persecution of Christians in some Muslim countries. There is a lot of persecution of Muslims all over the world. I just received an email today from Burma Task Force, which is saying that the next 2 days, the Buddhists have passed, I don't know, legislation or what, that every child over the age of 12 will be killed in Burma, Muslim child in 3 villages. We are still following that. I could not attend the conference call today because I had to come here. There are Muslims in China, in Burma, in Sri Lanka, in you name it, everywhere. Why? How do these people of faith, whether they are Christians, Muslims, Jews, survive under persecution and oppression? Is because first is the belief in the Creator and their faith that keeps them going, and second, there are many Muslims and Christians and Jews who come to each other's support. When the church was burnt in Peshawar, one of the oldest churches in Pakistan, it was the human chain that the Muslims formed around the church to make sure that the people could worship in that church. One of the oldest and largest churches in South Asia that has just opened is in Karachi, Pakistan, and it is the Muslim neighbors that protect it and stand to protect it. So I think we can look at the worst of humanity, or we can look at the best of humanity, and the best of humanity exists in all our faiths and all our traditions, including humanist and atheist and so forth. The best people who have come to our rescue in the West, when you look at Quebec Charter of Values, when you see our Prime Minister saying Islamicism is the greatest threat to Canada, the people from the humanist, agnostic, atheist groups have come to our aid and stood with us. It is the First Nations people that have come and stood with us. It is the Jews and the Christians who have come and stood with us. So either I can concentrate on the bad apples in all our communities and have a jaded view of their, or I can look at the ones who are truly living their faith, regardless of what faith there is or no faith, are the ones that you and I in Canada should be looking at and supporting, because they truly are the hope for the future.
We have time for a few more questions here in the audience. Who do we have? Right over here, back of the room, nice and loud, nice and slow, because we don't have the monitors up here. Go ahead, please.
Hello, Diana. I'm just wondering, if you believe that there is no ultimate purpose to life, why have you decided that your purpose in life is to convince others that life is meaningless?
Diane, if you want to answer that, go ahead. If you don't, well, who cares?
Well, first of all, purpose and meaning are two different things. Something could have a purpose but not have any meaning. So, like I said, meaning is personal. It's up to me to create my own meaning for whatever I want to do. People seem to think that because there's no eternal reward, and I think Andy was referring to this during his talk, although I couldn't hear, it was very echoey back here, that, ultimately if we end up in the heat death of the universe, there's no meaning at all. Life is meaningful in the moment. When I'm enjoying an ice cream cone, it doesn't have extra meaning if I was going to be enjoying that ice cream cone forever. I'm enjoying it right now, and the fact that it is finite doesn't take away the meaning that I feel for it right now. I don't know what else I can say. I mean, life is what you make it.
Okay. Yeah, I think the first thing I'd want to say, I was a nice kind of pointed question. I think the thing I admire about my humanist friends, I can't yet call down our humanist friends who we met this evening, but what I certainly admire about humanism is that recognition that there is value and there is meaning in human life. And I love what Shahina said about the way that so many of our friends from the humanist tradition take a stand on issues of justice. I think the difficulty is, and the quotation that the line from my talk that Dinah referred to, and I appreciate it was very echoey here without the monitors. comes from Bertrand Russell, one of the most famous atheists of the 20th century, and it was he who said that actually whatever you choose now doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what wonderful edifices humanity constructs, it will burn in the heat death at the end of the universe, and therefore you may choose whatever you like. The only certainty, he argues in his essay, is unyielding despair. And my challenge to Diana and to others is, where is he wrong? Rather than just give me stories about ice cream, it's Bertrand Russell. Where is he wrong? He may be wrong, but I would like to see someone point that out. A contemporary example, very quickly, would be John Gray, Professor of European Thought at the London School of Economics, very iconoclastic atheist, who is on record, I believe it was John Gray, as famously saying that theists make untenable claims about God and humanists make untenable claims about human beings, because at the end of the day you can invent whatever meaning you like, but the universe simply doesn't care. You can eat the ice cream or stick it up your nose, but ultimately you are going the same way. And so you can sit there and say meaning, 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 but in the words of the poet Stephen Crane, a man said to the universe, "Sir, I exist." The universe replied, "Yes, but that has entailed in me no sense of responsibility whatsoever."
How does having an eternal life give any extra meaning to you? What about that makes your life more special than mine, or having more meaning? I mean, it's not something that can be measured or quantified. It's a human experience. And like I said, I could just take it back to you. What about having God in your life makes it more meaningful?
Can I answer that? Okay, I mean, I think two things there I would say, Diana. I mean, and I'll give the Christian answer in a moment. But of course, simply pushing it back onto me doesn't answer the question for the atheist. If atheism is true, and we live in a godless universe, and everything is physics and chemistry and biology, that is all there are. You are merely, Bertrand Russell's words, a random collocation of atoms. You can scream, you can rant, you can shake your fist and do what you like, but at the end of the day, that is all there is. That's where we're stuck. So I think that's one question. Let's not confuse that then with the question of, okay, do Christians have it any better? Because if your accusation of me is right, we're in the same boat. We're all on the Titanic and we're all going down. Let me finish a moment. And if we're on the Titanic and we're going down because we've hit the iceberg, it doesn't matter if I hug the person next to me or I steal his wallet, we are still going down. What Christianity says is that there is a telos, there is a purpose to life. And what I like about some of the ancient philosophers, we talked about philosophy earlier, that I think someone like Aristotle, for example, who is not a Christian, so I don't need to appeal to Christians on this, discusses this whole idea and says, if there is a purpose, if life actually has a telos, if it has purpose built into it, then yes, there is meaning to be found, in the same way that the ship and the lawnmower, in my example, had purpose. If there is no purpose, then anything goes.
All right, very quickly, because I'm warming up the violin here for the Titanic.
Nearer my God to thee, I think, as the tune you want.
Just a response to...
You're good! Go ahead.
Just a response to, well, so what? You reduce it to a random collection of atoms. Those atoms are organized by evolution into a brain. The brain that I have produces a mind, and the mind allows me to experience everything. Live, laugh, love, learn. What else do you need?
I think it works for you, right? It works for you, what you just said. Works for you. Great. That's fine. It doesn't for me, so this is it. So I think that's what we should leave it at, because I have learned from you, and it's interesting, and it fortifies my belief, right? So that's why we need to know each other, because it makes us challenge our own thoughts, and it makes us articulate, which normally we would not. So I think there is merit and there is value in learning and listening from each other, and I would never say that your life does not have a meaning. Okay? So don't you ever think that. We all have a purpose, we all have a meaning, we found different meanings, different purposes, so be it.
Very quickly, I mean, I think the issue that Shahina's touched there is an interesting one, because we live in a culture, basically, that I think that would affirm what Shahina says there, that, you know, Diana can invent her meaning, I can invent mine, Shahina can invent hers. Of course, the problem we have is when those meanings conflict, is if my meaning and your meaning are directly in contradiction to each other. And so that's why we need something bigger, I think, than just personal preference. So whatever the answer is, and you've seen various things on offer tonight, this is why truth is important, because we need something bigger than just personal opinion, something other than just preference.
Over here, if you could stand up, we'll get you the microphone. The Winnipeg Jets player.
Your eyes are better than mine, Richard.
Go ahead, nice and loud and slowly, please.
I just have a question. With all the proof of Homo sapiens, how can Adam and Eve actually be the first humans? Because they've discovered skulls and everything like Homo sapiens. Would Adam and Eve be a Homo sapien, like an ape-like creature, or would they be like us? I'm just really questioning about that. If Adam and Eve would have actually been the first humans.
Does Shahina want to get first? Because that story's in the
From the Islamic reference, we believe that Adam was the first human created by Allah, and angels are his creations, and from Adam was created Eve. So yes, we believe in the theory of creation. We do know that human beings have evolved. We are told in the Quran that the prophets of before, the people of before were tall, very, very tall. We have, and since now we are what we are. So I don't believe we came from monkeys. If that's what was your question, I don't believe in Darwin's theory. There is an alternative that's out there, and there are people who refer to it. But in my frame of reference, we are created, and Adam was created. And to me, that's good enough.
Okay, I think from the Christian perspective, I would say something interesting. Obviously, I as a Christian believe that there was a time when God created us as distinct from human beings. There is discussion among Christians as the time scale on that. The interesting thing is actually how closely, in some ways, that coheres to biology in a couple of ways. One is that my biological friends, my evolutionary biology friends, will tell me that the genetic evidence is that human beings went through a genetic bottleneck, is the language that's like to be used, and there's discussion as to where that is. There are two that are suggested. One is North Africa, as Diana alluded to. The other is Europe. It's quite interesting that there's a question mark around where the first actual humans were. That's a live debate in biology. So I think actually both Christians, Muslims, and humanists and atheists have to be a little bit careful on this, on leaping on the science either one way or the other. The interesting thing is this, though. One thing that everyone has agreed upon, there is something very, very distinct between human beings and our nearest ancestor, quote unquote, among the rest of creation. In that, for example, if you look roughly about 17,500 years ago, science will tell us there was a huge explosion in things like art and language and culture. Something triggers that off. There's a huge difference. One of the other huge differences, of course, from animals is the conversation we're having tonight. When every other animal out there on the planet is not eating, reproducing, or fighting, it sleeps. Human beings, we sit here and we think about philosophy and we wrestle through these big questions. So be very, very careful not to confuse that difference between us and our fellow creatures too much. Yes, there is a relation, in my case I believe, because God made both myself and the animal kingdom. But on the other hand, there are some huge differences that if you blur and collapse, you end up with some pretty big moral problems there.
Now, as we end the evening, and I thought we would end on this question, because I started with asking you about yourselves, and I'm going to end that way. And the question is, quite simply, what was the convincing thing to lead each of you to what you believe in? And it says here, please give the guy a time limit because he's long-winded. Let's begin with Diana.
I'm British. My self-image is really now bad.
Let's begin with Diana. You can take it. Go ahead, Diana. What was that one convincing thing in your life that helped you convince the way you live now? What was it? pick up the microphone and talk for a minute. What was it in your life? What was the experience?
I think I need more time to think about this. I don't know that I can pin it on one thing. Like I sort of talked about in my presentation, certainly coming to my position that I don't have a belief in God was a gradual one. As to why I have such strong belief in humanist values, I think that I'd probably have to give the most credit to my family, to my parents. They supported their children to think independently. My father was a very compassionate person. He was a Christian, someone who looked at the world every day, and on a beautiful day he would think, look at this beautiful world God gave us. He wasn't a judgmental person, and so he imparted his values onto me. That's where I'd have to say it mostly comes from.
Andy?
The short answer. The short answer for me is this. In 1997, I went for the first time to a place in London, England, called Speaker's Corner, part of Hyde Park in London, known as the free speech capital of the world. And on a Sunday afternoon in Speaker's Corner, you can stand on a ladder or a soapbox and engage in debate about anything you like, religion, politics, you name it. Well, I had got invited down there by a friend who was using Speaker's Corner as a place to engage in debate with Muslims. And I was a Christian, and I thought, that sounds very interesting, let me go and do that. And what I discovered is that the Muslims and the atheists and the Marxists and everybody else I met at Speaker's Corner knew their worldview infinitely better than mine, and they tore me to pieces, humiliated me in public. Until you've stood on a ladder and had 300 people humiliate you, you really haven't lived. And I remember going home from that, my head spinning, thinking, okay, I have two choices here. I need to really investigate what I believe, and if it's not true, then I need to find what is true, because these guys are thought through. And that led me to begin studying and begin reading, like Diana. I love books, and I put my Christian worldview to the test. I decided I have to decide whether Jesus is who he claims to be, and I also investigated other worldviews, and in the case of Islam, that led to a PhD, but it's also led to studying atheism and atheistic philosophy in huge detail. And what I basically did was I ended up ranking the major worldviews in order and deciding what had the greatest weight of evidence. And I became utterly convinced that was Christianity, largely because of who Jesus was. Interestingly, Islam and humanism are not second on my list. I won't tell you what is, but if I wasn't a Christian, I wouldn't be either of these worldviews. There is another one that I think I would opt for. But it was largely through putting Jesus to the test and becoming utterly convinced that his claims stood up.
For me, I grew up in a home where we were encouraged to ask questions, and I took metaphysics in university and studied many philosophers from Aristotle to modern day, and all I could get from philosophy and metaphysics were questions, no answers. And so I was fed up of not getting the answers, and so I turned to the Quran. It took me 10 years to finish the Quran because I don't speak Arabic. I had to rely on translations. And at the end of that study, I had answers. I still have many questions, and I'm still finding answers. But if I can put it in one sentence, peace. I'm at peace. And that's why.
I thank you all for joining us this evening. A big round of applause for everyone here.
There are cards that have been distributed. If you put your email address on that,
They've taken the video of this tonight, and they would certainly send you the video of this Tuked and all, and you can edit for long-wittedness or anything like that. May I say, as somebody that deals in the day-to-day news business, where rightly or wrongly I interview a lot of politicians who stick to their talking points and their speaking notes, and I get aggravated, I have found this evening a fascinating discussion. I have personally learned from all three of you, and I hope, and I speak on behalf of our audience, thank you so very much for shedding light for us.